I wanted to start the discussion of sightseers with the question of morality, broadly.
What? In what respect?
Well, it's something that cropped up in Kill List, and I want to go back to that. And there's a quote from that film, which is that they're bad people that deserve what they're getting.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk about that as an entry point into sightseers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's a theme that runs through the movies that I'm interested in, which is this kind of personal morality, where the Down Terrace is the same. They've created their own moral universe, and Kill List is the same. Obviously, they're operating outside of the law, and certainly sightseers they make it up as they go along. Pretty much, it's not as certain as Kill List. But I mean, this stuff, that quote, the bad people they should suffer, is kind of part of a game which ends up with the librarian character getting his head smashed in, and that's the kind of thing of going, well, if you take kind of vigilante justice to its extreme, or you take that kind of thinking, which is the knee-jerk kind of tabloid newspaper reaction of like, a child has been killed, if I get hold of one of those guys, I'd smash his face in. Well, there we go. This is what happens, and it's not justice you get out of these things, but you become the thing that's the problem. I think that was kind of where that was at. I mean, in terms of sightseers, it's a kind of game that they play where he has a kind of moral kind of code, but it's very hazy, and will be reset to suit him whenever, which I kind of think is basically his own way of preserving his own integrity in terms of like not feeling guilty about stuff. She's a bit more of an open book, she does whatever, and we were thinking that if he hadn't been murdering people and he'd been interested in something else like hang gliding or something, she'd have got into that instead. She's just totally, she's kind of trying to follow what he's doing. It doesn't really matter, and then just because it's murder is something she gets behind, but it's not. She's open.
His decisions seem to come out of kind of frustration, though. But when she's following him, it seems like more of a, I don't even want to say naive. I think it's more someone who wants to try new things.
Yeah.
And that comes out pretty explicitly when she's talking about not wanting to go back to the box of her life. And maybe tasting new things is literal when she's tasting the blood. So I'm wondering how those two characters and how they kind of adapt to their scenarios differ.
Well, the thinking was that she was kind of a purer, kind of more open and chaotic character who could just, she was a force of nature, where he was a bit more anal and tried to control it. But it was this. The basic idea was that it's a guy who has a woman that he thinks is malleable, but it turns out she's actually better at it than he is, and she's the natural and surpasses him. And it happens in the movie where he just stops killing people, and then she carries on, until he becomes kind of the last victim.
And he kind of stops when he develops a kind of homosocial experience where he has like a friend that's a man that's also a business partner potentially that he can share that with. And what is the gender dynamics that are going on?
Well, that's a kind of it's another betrayal by him in the same way that with the kissing of the bride to be and the but it's already been set up that the logic of it is has he touched you logic of why the Rambler must die. So she's only following his example to its logical conclusion, but Chris is a bit more, he's already shown that he's pretty hypocritical when it comes to his rules, so she shouldn't really be, really be following it all the way to the end, but he's set the situation up and he's basically a victim of it.
And his hypocrisy is kind of driven by class too, because what bothers him at first seems like it's a general thing about littering, but then it seems in the second one that it's more of an envy for a different class and an irritation from, at least in my mind, gloating or like showing off one's...
Yeah, but also crushing his dream, as random as his dream is, he's never going to write the book, it's just bullshit, he's spinning her a line and he's kidding himself. I mean, I've seen it, I used to be a big joke where we'd talk to people and they're going, I'm going to take a year off and write my book, and Ames and I've been writing for like 10 fucking years and getting nowhere, and he's going, well, good luck with that, So that I think that's why and also the guy in Ian is massive liar anyway, because he's, you know, everyone's so quick to assume he's killed himself because of this financial problem that he's got. So he's putting forward this big thing of like, I'm really, really rich and successful. I've got my books, but it's like that's all a front as well.
And I also picked up on maybe some smaller things. In the case of Ian, there's the caravan that's free of clutter, and clutter being personal possessions is what they qualify as clutter. But also just the box that the one man has with his sandwich in it, how it's perfectly compartmentalized with like what seems to be healthy food versus say the crisps that they're feeding the dog.
Yeah.
It seemed like there was an element maybe of a different social sphere.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, but it's a lot of it's out of jealousy, really, you know. But it's that thing of, I mean, there's a lot of wish fulfillment in it that you wish you could take. I find that you're kind of frustrated in life, and all those people who litter or drunk people or abusing people on the train, you never do anything. One never does anything about it, and this guy does, but he doesn't. You know, he hasn't really thought it through particularly, and it's that thing of, well, you know, that there's a bit of kind of quasi social commentary in this stuff, but it really is just an excuse to vent his kind of rather random anger, whoever's kind of available. But he kind of dresses it up as it might become kind of social commentary, but I don't know. I don't think it probably is, you know.
Is that why there's kind of like a slow motion in the use of music for those moments where you do kind of get to live out those, or one gets to live out those?
Yeah, I think, I mean, that stuff was about is making those moments as vivid as possible, and the use of slow-mo in general in cinema, I think, for me, is this idea of is that time does move at different paces depending on how you feel, and it's trying to get to that real, even though it's a kind of it's an abstract thing to be into slow-mo, kind of, but it also in a weird way feels more realistic to me a bit. And also I wanted to make those kind of murders feel really hyper real, so you start to get the kind of, you get inside of Chris's and then Tina's heads as you experience this kind of incredible moment, and then it goes back to the socio-realist kind of style which the rest of the movie's in.
And there's also the use of a very impressive use of parallel editing in those moments. And is that to maybe signify the ripple effect of what these actions do, or? Yeah,
well, it's joining them. It's almost a kind of magical joining of these things. I mean, there's the first one where it happens where Tina's like watching the kind of shaman doing their thing, and then she's with them, and then it's cross cut between her dancing and Chris thinking, and it's almost like she projects herself there, and then he can see her, but did he imagine her there, or did she imagine it? And it's like them almost becoming like kind of joined together as one psyche, was the kind of thinking about it behind it. And then later you've got that thing of the murder of what was part of that same sequence, actually, kind of the murder of Ian, and the thinking behind that was, it was like all these little moments were joining together in almost a kind of they were the different parts of a kind of a spell that started to bind. So that this idea of, is it happening? Is Tina dreaming it, or is she psychically kind of reacting to it? But they've been joined at this moment beforehand, and now they're kind of they're twinned together.
Yeah, there's kind of a dream logic at points, and there's one point where there's literally a dream.
Yeah.
And I think that's a significant structural moment, and there's another moment that I wanted to talk about the two in relation to the other, and that is the flashback. The flashback serves a narrative function, but it also seems like it's a significant jump that happens.
Yeah, I mean, for me, structurally, there's the two big murders, the Ian's death and the bride's death, are the same sequence. You know, it's signified with the use of the same piece of music, but done from a male perspective, female perspective, different covers, and then also the shaman and the dancing is replicated by the brides, and then the head shaman, the kind of snake man, is the stripping policeman. So, but then again, structurally, after the bride's death is the dream sequence, but preceding the other one is her projecting herself into the shaman dance. So they're kind of basically the same sequence twice, as that she kind of, and it's her kind of taking over his his process and kind of swallowing him up, and then after that he stops murdering people, and she continues on. So what was the other thing?
There's the flashback.
That was. I just thought it was really funny, you know. There's no clever thinking behind that. Well, no, it's almost like she's lost inside the dog's head, which is, and the moment she sees this dog and feels that it's the dog from the past, and it's just such a mad, bonkers kind of moment for her.
Mm. And as the first shots of the film, that is kind of a through line that exists to kind of ground the story in one specific route.
Yeah, I mean, it's guilt. You know, she's guilty of this crime, and you know, and like the mother is, you know, upset about the dog dying as if it's like another child that's died. It's much more important than she is, and she's just reduced down to nothing. You know, but then the shots at the beginning then echo the shots at the end. The way that Tina is framed, her head's framed out, and talking to the mother, and then you get Chris at the end talking, standing over her with her head, his head framed out, and her sitting. She becomes the mother, and then she punches him in the nuts. So it's kind of these kind of bookend images.
You mentioned the cover songs, and I was interested not only of the selection of Season of the Witch, but also the use of covers generally.
That's kind of looking at that idea of that she's taking over and copying behaviour, and you get this. But it also for me was that you know, I tried to work out a scheme for each of the movies, how the music will work, and it was the thinking was that I'd watched this documentary about krautrock, and I was really I'd been kind of I'd grown up with this assumption that like the new wave and British post-punk stuff was like invented in the UK, you know, and like we were always told, you know, it's good, it's the greatest pop music in the world, British acts, it's so fantastic. But then when you actually dig into the history of it, it's all just copied, but you know, it didn't suddenly spring up in England. It's come from Neu, and it's come from, you know, Cluster and all these going Kraftwerk. So I felt like that felt to me like a weird hidden history, that we'd been sold this thing, a bill of goods wasn't true, you know. And so in the film you've got these two layers of like these big brassy pop tunes from the 80s, which is like the, you know, the reappropriation of that, and then underneath it you've got Neu and Cluster and Harmonia and all these kinds of bands, and it's just saying that, you know, that there's, you know, levels of reality within the film, you know, and that maybe, you know, that some of what you're being told isn't true.
But you also got Julie Driscoll, which is very localized as well.
Yeah.
Is that part of the tension? And I mean, with a lot of your films, in this one, is there an incidental score at the start, or is that a track?
No, there's a Jim Williams score in it as well that runs through it.
It, to my ears, just recalls something like Fairport Convention, or that kind of history of British folk music that exists, where it kind of starts getting a little more...
Yeah, a bit more pot.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It doesn't go as far as Current 93, but
it's a bit of that, and it was also a kind of, you know, it's a thinking score. You know, it's a sound of thinking and planning and plotting. That was the basic thought behind what kind of Jim was doing, and then he did the track that goes underneath the drive through all the rocks and stuff, which is like a big kind of Tangerine Dream style electronica thing, so we wanted to go from kind of analog instruments into kind of electronic instruments. You know, that's not right, is it? Anyway, you know, it goes from cello and stuff to big synths or Moogs or whatever you call them. So that was kind of his bag in it. It was the first time I've used a lot of pop tracks as well. I mean, I think there's only one track in the whole of Kill List. Yeah. It's the Joan Alma trading track, but in this one, we started to really construct it out of this music.
Is that because there's a kind of road movie quality, and there's a playlist that accompanies that? It was that,
and that it's really important that you get the right track to talk about their childhoods, because they're kind of like children, and it's it's contemporary, but it's a little bit like it's in the 70s as well, or the 80s.
Yeah.
So there was that element, and it's also just I had the money. You know, I could do it. You know, and I could start thinking like that, where I couldn't think like that before because we couldn't afford to clear the tracks.
Was there any influence from road movies, even particularly ones from the UK?
Not massively. I mean, we'd looked at all this stuff. I mean, the main problem, main worry I had was like, how do you cover the journey of things without it looking really boring over time? And that's a tricky situation. You know, I hate filming in cars, and there's only like 4 shots you can do unless you're going to fucking pull the car apart. So we watched a few. I mean, I think Easy Rider was the one I watched the most. Just to go right, but Easy Rider is a really weird film. If you watch it without the sound, it's like it's really rough, you know. But it's the music that just like pulls that movie together. It's odd.
There is a sense of space that to me came out the most with the William Blake poem, and I was wondering if you could talk maybe about kind of that history, like because they're discussing kind of medieval times almost at that point, and there is the kind of Jerusalem association.
Yeah, I mean that had come out of that poem, the Blake thing is said in public schools a lot. So it's a joke about that to one degree, and it's also like this thing of the the actual what Jerusalem means. You know, the lyrics mean Jesus coming to England and walking about, which is just like absolute hallucinatory bullshit, and also using someone like John Hurt to do it as well, which is like a kind of real, you've got really heavy gravitas, but then cutting it off halfway through with the murder. It's like it's a part of that kind of just slightly pissing on that idea of the upper classes. So he's got no respect for this guy, and he's got no respect. He hasn't got respect for any of these traditions, even though he talks about defending them.
I have the association of someone not in the UK with football too, and there's it's coming at a violent moment too, where this kind of thuggish attitude comes out, or tribalism.
Yeah, it's more tribal. I think it's not so much thuggish, but it's more primal, and there's those kind of themes run through, Kill List as well, and Down Terrace, so that idea of that all of history running at the same time, rather than that we pretend that we're in the modern world, but we're not. We're moments away from. I always like that idea of you think that what did the version of you do 100 years ago, and because you're not massively different from that person really. You like to pretend, one likes to pretend they are, but I'm sure that we're hardly different at all. And it's I always think of like Neil Maskell's character in Kill List, that he would have been at the Battle of Agincourt, and he would have been all these different places, and his whole kind of existence is like killing people and cutting their heads off and stuff, and now he's stuck in a kind of suburban house and he doesn't quite know what to do about it, and that's why he's so confused. And I think Chris is the same. He's a peak dwelling bloke who kills things with spears and things, and he's not right for this time.
What is the role of the suburban, or like we talked about the box before, but there's also the other metaphor of the sanctum and this kind of safety from not heading out of the house, I guess.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's a very similar space from that to Down Terrace and the suburban house in Kill List, though. It's a bit more. The Kill List house is a bit more aspirational but they're all the same. They're all real houses. No, actually, that's not true. The Sightseers one is a dress. It's not. It's a real house with a dress. But the Kill List house is Andy Stark, the producer's his sister-in-law's house. And then Down Terrace that wasn't dressed. That's Down Terrace. It was Bob Hill's house who's in it. So, but that they're real environments as much as we keep. Well, the first two are absolutely real, and the third one is made up. But it's an odd one, And you talk when I get interviewed by or some of the North American reviewers are kind of saying, they live in these squalid houses and stuff. It's like fucking you don't live in houses like that. It's not. It's just the scale of things is so much smaller in the UK. So, but yeah, I mean, there was another bit of thinking was that we'd had a film basically Down Terrace we never got out of the house, and so Kill List we got out of it after half hour, and this one we wanted to get out. Sightseers wanted to get out straight away because we'd done too much house-based drama.
I like that you used the word aspirational too, because in the first two films they're small. They also double as a kind of small business as well. So there is that much more safety that occurs. But in this sense, the aspirations need to be outside of the house.
Yeah, but he's got his thing. He wants to write the book, doesn't he? And she's just going along with that. And he's got, it's a tiny dream. But you also get the sneaky suspicion it's a suicide run. The whole thing is that it was always going to end up with him slinging himself off that bridge by hook or by crook. So, and the book is more like a suicide note, I think. And she sees that when she looks inside it and sees the drawings of this is what he's planning, inspired by her by that point. But it's also that idea that they, I think it's perfectly possible to murder a load of people and not get caught really quick if you murder strangers.
that you've got no association with, but you will get caught if you keep doing it, you know, over a period of a week. And I think he kind of probably knew in the back of his head that they were done for, especially when she's just so messy about it and leaving clues all over the place. So I think that's what pushes them to the kind of burning of the caravan and that whole end sequence.
The sound design in that end sequence is incredible, and it is throughout the film. And I read that you edit sound in. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I've got over the years I've got big sound libraries of my own, and also kind of ripped them out of games.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't use them in the films, but I use them as temp. So I like to cut with the sound in, so that again, so I've got a plan for it, so I know what, you know, and I'm not leaving it up to the sound mix, so that when we get there we go, right, how are we going to fix this? You know, but also just for pacing, so you know what you've got. I don't understand why you wouldn't do that. So you know that this will hold for a certain amount of time because you've got this sound. Also, I had such a good time doing Kill List when starting to do 5.1, and I just was like, you know, I really want to, you know, really think about how we do the surround sound stuff. So, and on Sightseers, the music, Jim's music, is all delivered to us as stems, so that we can put it through into surround. So it's surround mix. So sound comes from the back to the front, and all this within his music, which is something I thought was I hadn't really heard before, and you know, I thought it was quite interesting.
I had an interesting experience with the sound watching it last night, because I felt almost as if watching it with an audience kind of detracted from it for me, because it's a film where the tone shifts kind of on a dime, even maybe quicker than Kill List or Down Terrace. And the sound tended to cue that for me. I tended to feel like, okay, it's really funny, but now it's gone, there's an about face. And people just continued to laugh. I felt like that sound was a guiding point to maybe the tonal shifts.
It's a tricky thing with an audience, isn't it? I mean, and comedy is really tricky editing for an audience, because you sometimes you see it in TV stuff when you think it's achingly slow, but what they're waiting for is they're leaving gaps for the laughs. But if you don't laugh, it's bad news. So I kind of try and cut the stuff as fast as possible, and I don't care about leaving those gaps for the laugh. But the consequence of that, sometimes if there's a big laugh, you lose lines. You're going to lose a load of lines with an audience. But so you know, it's kind of, I'd rather have that than gaps. So it's. Yeah, I mean, I went to a screening of Down Terrace in Rotterdam, and when the old lady gets run over by the car, the laugh went on, but it did the whole of the next scene. Just gone, you know, you didn't hear any of it. So, but you know, you can't. I don't think you can count on that.
Was the tonal shift anything that you felt was a challenge to jump so quickly back and forth between?
No, I mean, you know, it's a way of working that we've had since Down Terrace. So. And that had come out of a short film we did, which is on the Down Terrace DVD, called Rob Loves Kerry, and that was the real eye-opener for us. That it was like the first thing Amy had edited as well. So it was like we cut all the exposition out, and we cut hard into crying and laughing. And it was like, wow, this works really well, and you can get past all this, you know, just people are smart enough to understand what's going on, and then but they give, you know, it's just like. You know, you get all that information in a rush rather than, but that was, I mean, Rob Loves Kerry is a much crazier film than Down Terrace ever was in the end. And I thought making Down Terrace, I'd gone into it thinking, I'm going to make a feature-length version of that short, which it had been done 10 years before. And but I'd done a lot of TV since then, so that calmed me down a bit. So I was surprised. I mean, I was surprised how. Kind of straight a lot of Down Terrace was. You know, we were gonna go a lot madder on it, but then we
didn't. Kill List, I found, tends to, the people like myself that love it and the people who don't love it as much tend to have the same reason, which is that there's like almost 3 different parts to it, or 3 different modes that it's operating in. And it's not just comedy or drama, but it's almost as if you've got your kind of kitchen sink realism or social realism at a certain point. You've got almost a road movie in the middle, and then you have more of the rural, supernatural film.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how you approach kind of melding genres in that way.
Well, I mean, I see that film, it is in 3 chunks that way, but I also see it as a symmetrical film, you know, so it can fold in the middle, and it has corresponding scenes that run across it.
Yeah.
And we you know, that was specific, you know, it was in the script.
And that you get this thing of like the hammer thing is 45 minutes into the middle, and then it was almost, we imagined that it was such a violent thing that it ripples through the rest of the movie, and it breaks the editing across the film. So yeah, I mean, I think that it didn't bother me massively that people felt that, but it just is what the story was, you know.
All those modes seem very tied, especially to British cinema and the history of British cinema, and in that sense, it's also a film, like all of your films to some extent are commenting on that. And I'm wondering what relationship you see it having with that history, and maybe not just the horror a lot of people talk about, but I'm maybe more interested in the social realism qualities.
Well, I was thinking a lot about Alan Clark for that one, and it's the violence of, in a way, almost, I feel like the inter-family violence is more, and the shouting is more violent than the actual physical stuff. And I think that's what pretty much upsets people from the get-go with that movie. And it was a weird thing we learned with it, was that didn't learn, I kind of knew it, but it was, you know, you come to the end of it in that film, is that if you can associate with something and you understand it, then it's much more, it's much stronger than stuff that's more movie trope stuff. So no one ever got upset about them shooting the priest in the head at all. You know, and it's like there's never a reaction in the cinema. It's like, you know, it's another guy getting shot in the head. But the hammer trauma stuff and the shouting in front of the kid stuff, people get really upset by, and I think it's just simply because they know what it is. You know, they've had it happen to them. Everyone's heard their parents argue, and they remember what that trauma is, and everyone's hit their hands with hammers, so they all know what that is. And very few people have been shot, you know, so they know that's a movie thing that happens to other people. You know, fictional people in fictional setups, but those other things are real things, you know, and. Yeah, and that was interesting to kind of play with that. So, you know, we play all our cards right up the front, so it's like claustrophobic and realistic, but also it kind of makes people switches the buttons that make them upset to start with, and then everything else that comes after that is basically, it buys you the more crazy stuff later on, because you feel like you're in a realistic mode. I mean, if it was a proper kind of Hollywood remake, the beginning of the movie would be some kind of crazy cult action which sets up the idea of the cult, and then you'd go back to the family, and then But by doing that, you would say to the audience, don't worry, this is a horror film, and we're going to do horror stuff in it. It's all a bit silly, and it will happen later on. You like this horror stuff, don't you? But you'll get to see more of it later on. Whereas the way the structure is in the film, it kind of says this is a very realistic kind of, you know, quasi-realistic documentary style drama about people who are having troubles, and then it goes crazy. So you kind of think it's much realer than it might not be, you know.
Not only is it realistic, but like another scene that you didn't mention that people really dislike is the actual murder with the hammer.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned that it's the absence of the cut, and that sounds completely right. But it's also, for me, the distance of the camera and the static quality. And in that sense, it's almost playing off of art, like a tradition of art films that's developed with like minimal movement of the camera. So it's away from maybe the escapism of an action film.
It's that, and it's also YouTube and execution footage, and you know, a lot of that YouTube stuff is just horrific, but you're miles away from it. It's like 4 pixels going up and down, and you know, or I saw a thing the other day with people falling off a mountain, and they were tied together on the rope, and they would go, and you can hardly see any of it, but you know what's happened. You just go, oh God, it's so just like a nightmare, horrible. So I think that's that language, you know. It's and it's uncut. It's never gonna, you know. And that's, you know, when people say the film is genre mashing or whatever the fuck that phrase is, the genre, the real interesting bit of genre jumping that I liked that I planned in the movie was jumping from cinema into YouTube, you know. And I think, you know, and that's that moment.
And is that informed by your work on kind of viral videos before, or sketch or anything like that?
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, that's something I'd learned from doing virals. I mean, it's such simple stuff, you know, the kind of handheld footage. As soon as it's handheld, people think it's real, because that's their experience of watching handheld stuff is from wedding videos through to documentary stuff. So as soon as you shoot stuff like that, it feels, you know, it's talking that language that means
it's real, because why would anyone shoot in handheld otherwise, you know? So there's that, and then the idea that cutting. I started thinking that cutting in itself was artificial, and I was reading, I think Walter Murch was saying about, you know, if you look from side to side, you tend to close your eyes, and that's a natural cut, but, you know, that's kind of, you know, I think it's the only time you really cut is when you're knocked unconscious, or you go to sleep, you wake up, you know, that's a proper cut, you know, and it doesn't happen very often in life. So, you know, as soon as you start introducing edits into it, you're saying there's artifice here, and that's the language of a horror film in that moment would have been it would have been still really horrible, but it would have been cut really close in, and something goes smash, and all the blood comes up, but that kind of is letting you off the hook and saying this isn't real. We all know that this is prosthetics because we talk about this a lot, and everyone knows that, you know. And we've compressed time in some way, and obviously everything's moved around. You'd know it subconsciously that had happened. But when you don't see it, you just go, oh God, they really hit that actor, you know. And he kind of did as well. So I mean, he's a rubber hammer, so he is impacting on him for sure.
That film you had 3 editors, yourself and your wife. How do you set up a set piece like that when you have people editing in different rooms?
Well, how we kind of work with Rob is he's somewhere else, and Ames and I edit together, and there's there's three modes really. So Rob's editing away, and he'll post his edits via Dropbox or something, okay. and we all have got duplicate rushes, and I'll look at what he's up to, and I won't talk to him about it because I want to have that kind of safety net of that it's unmediated. I haven't kind of told him, I haven't put my ideas across it so that he can find something completely different and new in it if it's there, you know, in the rushes. And then I'll look at his stuff and I go, oh yeah, okay, that's great, or okay, I'm not using that. And then I'll edit on my own. So that'll be that. And then I'll edit, I'll operate, and Amy will tell me what to do. So at that point I kind of become like a traditional editor, and I don't really have much of an opinion on what I'm doing, but sometimes I'll change it a bit as it goes along a little bit, but I try not to, even at the most craziest stuff that she's saying, I'm trying not to interfere with that because I want her pure kind of what she's thinking and her thought patterns into it. And then it's kind of a basic mashup of all those different types of cutting. But generally speaking, like in Kill List, Rob would have done something like the Christian scene would have been one of his, because it's kind of a technical, difficult, overlapping Altman-y dialogue nightmare, the way I shot it, because everyone's all on radio mics all talking at the same time on both tables. I'll do something like the tunnel stuff would have been all mine, and then Ames would have come in and done like the crazier cuts, like coming out of like the librarian title into that whooshing noise into the punch. That was one of hers, and kind of, and then she also works across as a more editorial, so she'll be like, you know, restructuring the script as we're putting it together. So obviously she's written the script, but then the last pass on the script from the improvisation is her across it, kind of making sure that it makes sense, and trimming out the stuff that we don't need.
So the tunnel being the end of the film, you were responsible, kind of?
Well, they're more the actiony bits, because it's maybe not necessarily even that I'm particularly better than anyone else at doing it. It's just I really like stuff like that, so I want it for myself, you know, because I'm greedy for that. So, and then I'll sound mix that as I go as well. I'll sound layer that, and then that'll go to Martin Pavey, who's the sound designer, and he'll replace all the sound, and then add his own thing on top of it, and then we do the mix after that.
The edit of the ending's kind of frantic, but the story also is, in the sense that there's not really any answers given at that point. And was that something that you were deliberately approaching the film to not reveal too much about why this cult exists?
Yeah, I don't think that stuff's that important.
Yeah,
I think most of the questions are answered in it that need answering.
Yeah.
I think there's been criticism of saying, oh, he just comes out of nowhere, but that's just bullshit. It's like it's all in there. It's all, structured pretty tightly. What how they're being involved in it, and whatnot. So, but in terms of like the kind of, a scientist or a kind of detective coming on and going, his mistake was this, and this cult has been. It's like, what was it, the Race with the Devil, the Warren Oates film, where they actually have to stop at a library and look up Satanism in a massive book and go, Satanists, okay. It goes on for like 20 minutes, and you're like, wow, who is it in that? It's
what's the name from MASH, isn't it? Who plays Hot Lips Houlihan?
I don't know.
But you know, they have a literal scene when they have to read about this stuff, and you're like, well, does it matter? You know, it's the stuff that's scary about that movie is not that. You know.
I found the ending scary as well from like a class point of view, because it not knowing about the cult is, I think, beyond borders conveys a sense of there being a private body that somehow has control of things that you do not.
Yeah.
And regardless of where the main characters, who they work for, the government, they're hired guns. So it seems like at every level they are a lower class in some respect.
Yeah, I mean, I think the film is from Jay's point of view, and Jay doesn't know.
Yeah.
So why would we know? You know, that's what the whole thing about. It's all about posing questions, not giving answers, because answers aren't ever that satisfying or interesting. But questions make you think about lots of different kind of aspects, and you know, that's what's more interesting in a way. But I think, you know, the clues that you get about, if you really want to, you know who these guys are, it's like there's loads of clues to what they are. I mean, I always imagine they're a kind of that, you know, the back in the day when animal sacrifices and human sacrifices and stuff were about crops failing, and these guys are more like a modern version of a cult that are, or a religion that sits under all religions, and they're in control of the money markets, and the money markets are failing, so they're now reconstructing this thing to restart the money markets. But as you can see, this is a very boring thing to hear. You know, it's just like, it's in there, but it's not something you ever want to say out loud. And I've seen like breakdowns of the movie online, and people just completely, they read it all and it's all there, and you sit there and go, wow, you know, you have to have faith in the audience to understand it. But also, it was designed that it didn't matter if you didn't understand it, and that wasn't a failure of the film or a failure of you as a viewer that you didn't understand it, because it's like, you know, and one of the examples I use is a primer. In primer, I don't understand what is going on, but it doesn't mean I don't enjoy it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not angry at the filmmakers because I don't understand the science of primer, you know, or any of the work of David Lynch. You know, it's like there's plenty of stuff that goes straight over my head, but I don't, you know, I'm not angry about that. It's more that it's the feeling of the ride of these movies is really, you know, that's what the experience is in a way.
Well, it's also scary enough to know that the upward mobility that Jay has at the beginning or preceding the film, and then at the end, the opportunity to be part of this is at the destruction of his own personal relationships or his family.
Yeah, but it's also like something he wanted.
Yeah.
And he gets it. He wins, and it's like, and he wins a hat, but he wins he gets to be on his own. He doesn't have to do anything. He can sit on the sofa now, and that's the consequence of it. Again, you know, like the murdering of paedophiles, you know, on a whim with no evidence, which he kind of does, you know.
Well, it's like Down Terrace in that respect. That's also a film about aspirations and a desire to be upwardly mobile in some way that comes at the expense of the familial unit.
Yeah, I mean, the Down Terrace is an odd one because it had come out of. It was originally a thing we were working on called Robin and Robert, which was about this. It was a script about artists, and they were a conceptual. They did conceptual art, and but how it was set up is that the father and the son were a team that were going back through history, and they'd started off as like crofters or something, you know. But whenever the son has a child and has another son, then the father has to retire, and it causes all kinds of trouble. And it was set in, you know, it's like in a gallery somewhere, and they were anyway. So it took that structure, and we're like, which is in Down Terrace, which is that the child has to become a man, and the father has to step down, and that was the basic starting block for it.
We've talked about domesticity, and I think that's maybe the most important aspect of Down Terrace. And I mean, to my mind, it called up something like the royal family, even the way that there is a sadness to how static these lives can be. And it's a film where we don't really see the exciting crime element. We only see the behind-the-scenes nitty-gritty.
I don't think there is any exciting crime element to Down Terrace. I don't think I mean, you know, that's why we don't even say what they do. I mean, it's just like,
it's probably something really grubby and not very well paid by the looks of them all. Maybe that would come out of a bit of that thing of like when they in Italy when they'd find these mafia guys and they'd be living in a shack somewhere because they're like really powerful and they've got loads of money but they can't show it outwardly, which is like crazy, you know. It's like what's the point of it? I don't understand. It's like anyway. So there was that they didn't want to draw attention to themselves. And then the idea that they were also this thing of that they've been there for generations. I mean, there's a mention of this family tree thing, but it's like this is a family that had been, you know, you can imagine them again back in, you know, the Dark Ages, kind of stabbing people and robbing them and stuff. So it had been a cycle that had been going on and on and on, and they but they make their own. And the other thing we were thinking about with it was that for me it was about the kind of Blair and the dirty dossier and all that kind of thing and Iraq and this idea that you could, by saying that what you did you believe was right at the time, justifies whatever you do. And so they use that excuse in the movie. It's like, oh yeah, well, I think it was okay. I mean, we're going to kill all these guys because now they're all dead and it's all got really complicated, but it was okay because we thought it was right at the start. It's like, when was that a defense? You know, it's like, what if I go into a shop and think I thought that the food was all free and I steal it? Will that stop them sending me to prison? I don't think it would. You know, even if I really believed it. You know, so that, you know, and they basically they're like a city, they're like a country, and they declare war on everybody around them. And then it just shows how that, you know, the madness of that just takes them all to pieces. Visually,
and this kind of works with what you were just saying, the closer the camera gets, the more claustrophobic you get in that space as well. It seems like the closer the story gets to the characters, the closer they look at the situation they're in, the closer the camera gets, the more uncomfortable everything becomes.
Yeah. I mean, the house is tiny.
Yeah.
So that kind of dictated quite a lot of that stuff. It's the first time that Laurie and I had shot on primes for such a long time for a feature. So we kind of went prime crazy and shallow depth of field crazy in that. And then you see in the movies that the depth of field gets wider until, like, you know, I think it's on Down Terrace it was like that, and then on Kill List it's about that, and then Sightseers is like that. You know, you don't see all this kind of desperate chasing of focus that Laurie has to do because he operates and focuses. He doesn't have a focus puller, so. So yeah, we were really into all that, and it made sense within that house because everything's so tight.
Was that fun to go to the vistas of Sightseers from?
Yeah, that was one of the things, you know, why I wanted to do it, to get outside, you know.
What working with the width of those shots was compositionally, what were you most excited for? And especially the times of days you're shooting at, just not being in an interior but having an exterior as well.
Well, I mean, you know, Sightseers is just it's all weather, all hours. You know, I learned a long time ago that there's no point writing, you know, exterior golden hour in a low budget script because it's like, well, you know, you get golden hour once fucking every 6 months in England, maybe, if you're lucky. You know, maybe it's just grey hour before it goes dark. So it's just, but when you get it, you know, it's amazing. But so you're more reacting to what you've got than planning it.
With all of the films, they all tend to have a structure that they lay bare. You have the day-to-day structure in Down Terrace. You have the list and kill list, and you have kind of the map in Sightseers. How important is having that kind of, or at least the illusion of a very specific plan?
Yeah, it just helps, doesn't it, with the general tying together of the knots of the thing, and you know, and then we always, you know, we kind of find these the rhythms of it within it, and like we're saying in Kill List we had the symmetrical thing, and then within Sightseers we found the double murders were the thing that really tied it together for us, of finding that big chunks of it really were replicating across it. And once we found that pattern, then some of it was planned, but some of it wasn't. And once we found it, we kind of made sure that those things started to match a bit more, and it informed how we were going to cut the things around it. So that's the joy of you know, one of the joys of doing long form is to find those rhythms across. And it's not just acts, it's half act to half act, and then it's the end of the movie talking to the middle of the movie, and
in talking to the end and all these kinds of things. So that starts to become more important.
Is there a significance to the specific locations in Sightseers as far as the relationship to the story and how it progresses? Is there maybe a mirroring that goes on?
No, it's not as clever as that, sadly. No, they'd all come from Alice and Steve, so they'd come from a road trip that Steve's dad had planned for them. So they're all in the right order, and they are shot chronologically, and they're all real, you know. But there's nothing. It doesn't make a shape or anything like that.
A big pencil.
Yeah.
What was it like with the adapting and that? What did you feel that you had that would definitely work with this project?
It kind of from the start kind of fitted in with my themes and stuff I like, and that's, you know, which is no coincidence. It's why they approached me, I'm sure, because it makes sense. And then we did a pass on the script, or Amy did a pass on the script, which kind of then sorted out, like, kind of structurally how the film was fitted together to make it, well, basically just to use the stuff that we'd learned from doing the other movies. And there'd been a lot of development with the script, and it'd been going round and round for years, and, you know, they'd be getting lots of different advice about, you've got to do it like this, got to do it like that. And I was like, look, I've done it. I've done these films. I know what they are. You know, Kill List really isn't structurally massively different from this movie. So, you know, you've got, you know, if you want it to work like this, these things are going to have to happen. So, and then we kind of, lots of the elements were in there, but we kind of Ames tidied them up a bit more. So, like the kind of stone circle and the Rambler were more specific things that, you know, she wrote all the Rambler stuff, and she'd written all the she wrote the Carapod into it, and she extended out the dog stuff, which originally the dog kind of disappeared after Ian and Janice goes, but then Amy put in the stealing of the dog and the transporting, you know, so, you know, that kind of thing. So it was kind of retailored back to fit with the other movies, but then also we did loads of improv, but then Ames was in on the edit again, so she kind of then made it make sense as a story again, incorporating all the new material.
It's a film where you have a lot of close-ups, and it seems like a lot of the gestures are captured. Is that something where you're trusting that these are actors that have inhabited these characters for so long, and that they are that expressive of them that allowed you to?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that, you know, they'd obviously been doing these characters for years, so I knew that it would, you know, and that's the beauty of it, that you've got people who have written the script and could improvise in character stuff that was useful. I mean, that was the problem. A problem you get with, you know, on Kill List, the guys who were improvising was amazing. The performances are brilliant, but when you get to the cold light of day of having to fit it into the movie, you get basically about a minute or so, and then it goes off theme, and you can't. It doesn't earn its place, and you know, it's a cutthroat world in the edit. You know, if it's not holding its weight, it's got to go. So, so they were able to stay more on theme to a degree. You know. So we did a lot more wild improv that was then put into the movie because it fitted. But Kill List ended up, we used a lot of stuff where you go, I tend to shoot like a take that's on the script and a take that's off the script, which is like a paraphrase version, then back on the script, back off, on, off, on, off. And Kill List feels improvised, but it's actually mainly scripted. But those off-script ones give you the ums and ahs occasionally, and also they feed back into the scripted version, so that the script gets more. The scripted readings have more meaning because they understand. You know, they've emotionally connected to the lines. You know, from before. But then there are bits in it that are. I mean, we had that thing with it. It's credited as additional dialogue by the cast, and that had come out of Down Terrace, where the line I'm gonna fuck you up the arse and set your hair on fire was someone had asked me if I'd written it, and I said no, I hadn't, and the guy said yeah, I know, because it's something Smiley says all the time. And because he's a stand-up, you know, he's part of an act, and I realised that I now was attributed to writing that, and I hadn't written it, and it's bad. And when you get people in who are stand-up comedians like that, like Smiley is, he's burning his own material for you, and it's like it's not good to take credit for that. So you know, if I go back, I'd re-credit Down Terrace like that as well. But the stuff that him and Maskell and Miana threw into Kill List was, you know, there's some really good bits, and you know, so they got the credit for that.
Thanks, Ben.
Ooh. Wow, that's it.
I got that.